Hey everyone, it's Kay, and this is Dark Tales from the Road. Thank you guys so much for joining me today for episode 48. I cannot believe we're almost to 50. It's been a crazy journey, that's for sure, and on the 12th, May 12th is actually when my podcast turned 1 year old. It's kind of crazy to think about last May and why I got started and how I got started, and I can't believe it's been a year already. Anyways, I will go ahead and just jump right into it. I'm very excited for today's episode, even though it is sad. It's very sad. I will put a trigger warning out there. I will mention suicide, attempted suicide, and abortions. So just a heads up, it's very small snippets. It's not a huge thing, but it is something that Miss Judy Garland did go through during her life. She had a very, very, very hard life. And she was never given a chance, it feels like. It's so sad. So again, we're gonna explore the life of Judy Garland, and she was born in Grand Rapids, Minnesota. So I'll do a little history of Minnesota, a little bit of Grand Rapids, and then we will jump right in. I'm so excited. This was a crazy one to research, and I've had this on my schedule since I first started. So finally made it to my Judy Garland episode. So we're going to go ahead and jump on in. So Minnesota and this area is really known as the birthplace of Judy Garland. So a little bit about Minnesota. Indian tribes have lived there for thousands of years. And by the 1600s, there were two main groups that lived in the area. And they were the Dakota and the Anishinaabe. So sorry, I probably did that wrong because there's two A's in the middle, but they were also known as the Ojibwe and Algonquin by Europeans. The groups in this area, they really relied on the waterways for their food, for their transportation, and their trade, and they actually are what named Minnesota because it comes from a Dakota word that's for, quote, cloudy water. That's what Minnesota means. Then came French fur traders. We know definitely in those upper states, a lot of fur trading was happening and really creating the population and the growth around the area. So French fur traders were with these tribes in the 1600s, and they got along fine. They would negotiate with different trades and things like that. But once they hit the 1800s and Christian missionaries, soldiers, and different settlers started to come into Minnesota, that's when things were turning. The missionaries there actually wiped out much of the Dakotas' culture, but at the same time they actually created a language writing system that helped to save the Dakota language. Sad, but okay. And things just kept getting worse and worse between the new settlers and the Native Americans. They were constantly at war up until like the 1850s when they decided to secede their land to the United States. Most of it, not all of it. They were forced to sell about 90% of their reservation lands to the white settlers, and just trying to survive became a massive struggle because the buffalo population was plummeting, and again, they had to sign treaties with the United States for land. Like literally in 1851, the Sioux, which are in that area, also they sold almost 24 million acres in total, which is nearly all of their territory, to the settlers around Iowa, Minnesota, and South Dakota. All they had left was a 20-mile strip on the Minnesota River. That's it. Like, that's so sad. And at the same time, the government was not paying the Dakotas correctly. and they had promised to help preserve their land and their territory, and they promised to take care of the farming land so they can come in again. But what they did was they opened all of that up to white settlers to come in. So no preservation of their land, not paid for their land, anything like that. The Dakota were done. The U.S. government was not making treaty payments. They were not helping with food supplies and things like that. And so in 1862, which is known as the Dakota Uprising, that's when the Dakotas really attacked, and they killed more than 500 white settlers, and then 150 Dakota died. It was August 17th of 1862. So after the uprising, the U.S. government moved the Dakota tribe to a concentration camp, and it was for people who didn't who were going against the government, didn't want to participate, things like that. And it was in November, and so many died because of disease in the harsh winter conditions. President Abraham Lincoln actually commuted the death sentences of 264 convicted Dakota not charged with murder. And then December 26th of 1862, 38 of 300 convicted Dakota were hung in Mankato, and it's the largest mass execution in American history, is what the article said. So I could be wrong on that part. Then after that, Congress passed a law pushing all the Dakotas from Minnesota. They were forcibly removed to head to South Dakota, Iowa, and Nebraska, and many, many died along the way. Only a handful of Dakota people actually remained in Minnesota. That was in the 1870s, though. More and more returned in the 1880s and 1890s, and then in 1934, the Indian Reorganization Act was established to let Native American people have their lands back in Minnesota. 1960s, Native Americans across the whole U.S. really started to reclaim their culture and really wanted to help improve conditions for other indigenous people and tribes. And then 1968 was when the American Indian movement was established in Minneapolis. So kind of going back to around 1812, the War of 1812 was because of trade disputes between Great Britain and the U.S., and at that time during this war there was a treaty, there was a convention, and this helped to establish the state of Minnesota, where it could have been a part of Canada, and then they formally made Minnesota a part of the U.S. Minnesota is huge in the logging industry. It really picked up in the 1850s, and a lot of people that came were from British descent. They said they wanted to create, quote, a New England of the West. And then on May 11th of 1858, Minnesota became the 32nd state admitted to the Union. The fur traders there were the first to use slaves because they were the first white settlers that arrived in Minnesota. There were all kinds of treaties that were signed to prevent slavery in the area, but people were still enslaved in Minnesota. And there was a fort that was built called Fort Snelling, and slavery was huge there. And it was the United States Army that was enslaving them. Immigration is a huge part of Minnesota's history because during the 1800s, 1860s, 1870s, there was a huge amount of immigrants that came in from Norway, Sweden, Finland, Germany, Czechoslovakia, France, Italy, and Poland. And then by the end of the 1800s, 40% of the state's population was actually born outside the United States, which nationally the percentage was 11. So it's pretty crazy that, almost half of Minnesota's population. And of that population, more than 60% of it was from Germany, Norway, and Sweden. In the 1870s, they also saw an influx of Chinese immigrants to escape the anti-Chinese sentiment that was brewing on the West Coast. And so more and more were coming from Cambodia, Laos, and South Vietnam to escape their governments also. By 2010, Asian Americans were the fastest growing ethnic group in Minnesota. Also, farm workers from Mexico started to immigrate into Minnesota in like the 1910s because they were escaping poverty and the Mexican Revolution. And it grew and grew and grew, especially into the 1990s when people were coming to work there in the manufacturing, the service sector, construction, and processes. It was known as the Chicano movement, and it really wanted to help the impoverished who needed help getting work and living conditions for the Hispanic people. And that started in the 1960s and is still very present today there. In the 1990s, refugees who were fleeing the Civil War and the famine in Somalia arrived in Minnesota. And today the state has the largest Somali community in the world, with up to 47,000 Minnesotans claiming Somali ancestry. I cannot talk. I'm so sorry. Minnesota is also home to huge industry, forestry, health, and retail. A lot of the big corporations that are there are 3M, Mayo Clinic, Target, General Mills, and Best Buy. The Bloomington's Mall of America is also in Minnesota, and it gets about 40 million visitors each year, most visited shopping center in the U.S. It is huge. It opened in 1992 and has 4.2 million square feet. And it says it's enough space to fit 32 Boeing 747s inside. I have never been there. I couldn't tell you, but that sounds massively insane. So just some facts, fun facts. The first successful open heart surgery was performed on a 5-year-old girl, September 2nd, 1952, by Dr. Floyd John Lewis and Dr. Clarence Walton Lelyhay, at the University of Minnesota. They had reduced her body temperature to 81 degrees Fahrenheit, and she was able to survive for 10 minutes while the doctors repaired a congenital hole in her heart. Crazy. The Skyway system in downtown Minneapolis is the world's largest continuous indoor network of pedestrian pathways. It's 8 miles and connects 73 blocks. So it says you could sleep, eat, work, and shop without ever stepping a foot outside. And Minnesota's nickname is the land of 10,000 lakes. A more accurate name would be the land of 11,842 lakes. All right, just a little tidbit on Grand Rapids here. Small place. It has a population of about 10,000 people, and it is named for the 3.5 mile or 5.6 kilometer long local rapids in the Mississippi River. It was the uppermost part that the steamboat could travel during the 19th century, but sadly the rapids are hidden underneath the dam, a dam of the Blandon paper mill. It was originally a logging town and was huge for large shipment to population centers, especially where they were located around those rapids. And that is really how the Blandon paper mill came about in 1902. So just a tiny bit there. We're going to jump into Judy Garland because I really cover a lot and I want to make sure to get to all of it. So, Judy Garland was born Frances Ethel Gumm. She was born June 10th of 1922. She was an American actress and singer and the youngest child of Ethel Marion and Francis Frank Gumm. We're just going to jump into how horrible her life is. We're going to recognize a lot of the work that she's done, awards she's won, her memory lives on, everything like that. But she had a very, very hard life and was neglected and abused in so many different ways. So we're going to bounce around. I'm sorry, but this is how I kind of wanted it to go in order. So just bear with me, because it's not all great. And the next part I'm going to say is not great. So her parents actually thought about terminating the pregnancy. Ethel found out she was pregnant in 1921 and was not happy about it. They already had 2 kids, 2 girls, and Judy was the third. Her husband, Frank, actually contacted a friend of his name was Marcus Rabwin, he was a medical student at the University of Minnesota, and he asked him about terminating the pregnancy. And what people believe is that because there were huge rumors going around that Frank, Judy's father, had affairs with young men and teenage boys, and it was affecting Ethel, and she did not want to have this child. But Rabwin, the doctor, said, abortions were not permitted at the time, and doing an illegal procedure could put Ethel at risk. And he urged the couple to go ahead with the pregnancy, and they did, and that's when Frances Ethel Gumm was born. So, like her parents, Garland wouldn't have a happy home life even as an adult. She actually would get married 5 times before she passed at the age of 47. Her parents were actually vaudevillians who settled in Grand Rapids and ran a movie theater featuring different vaudeville acts. So as a child, she started performing with her 2 older sisters. They were a vaudeville group called the Gumm Sisters. They used to call Judy Baby, and she was the same. She loved song and dance. She wanted to do all of that. So her first appearance was actually at the age of 2 when she joined her older sisters, Mary and Dorothy, on the stage, and this was at their father's movie theater, and it was a Christmas show, and she sang the chorus of Jingle Bells, and they would perform there over the next few years as they were accompanied by the mom on the piano. Eventually, the family decided to relocate to Lancaster, California in 1926, and a lot of that came, again, for the rumors that the father was homosexual. But Frank bought another theater in Lancaster, and then Ethel began managing the daughters and trying to get them into motion pictures. They continued to tour doing vaudeville as the Gumm Sisters for many years, and until they met a man named George Jessel in 1934. He encouraged the group to choose a better name because Gumm just wasn't good. You know what I mean. So there's different ways that have been said about how the name Garland came around. Some said that Jessel did it after Carol Lombard's character Lily Garland in the film 20th Century. He also had announced that the trio looked prettier than a garland of flowers. So the Gumm Sisters changed their name to the Garland Sisters, and Frances changed her name to Judy because she was inspired by a Hoagie Carmichael song. Eventually, the group of the girls did break up in 1935 when Suzanne, the oldest, she flew to Reno, Nevada and got married. So the band broke up. Later, she was signed to a Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer as a teenager, so MGM. And how she was kind of discovered was in 1935, a man, Louis B. Mayer, who is a part of MGM, he's the last M, he asked a songwriter, his name was Burton Lane, to go to the Orpheum Theater in downtown LA to watch the Garland Sisters act and to report to him what it was like. A few days later, Judy and her father were brought to MGM Studios in Culver City for an impromptu audition. So Judy sang "Zing Went the Strings of My Heart" and "Eli, Eli," and the studio immediately signed Garland to a contract with MGM. They were so excited about her, but then all of a sudden, they don't know what to do with her. She was 13 when she signed on with MGM, and she was older than like a traditional child star, but she was too young for adult roles. And a huge part of Judy's life is based on her appearance. It's so sad. MGM did not like the way that she physically appeared, which doesn't make any sense. Why would you sign her on the dot if, it doesn't make any sense. She was 4'11", and she had a very cute or girl next door look. And so it didn't really show this glamorous persona that a lot of the leading female performers looked like. She was extremely self-conscious about her appearance, and Judy actually went to school at Metro with Ava Gardner, Lana Turner, Elizabeth Taylor, and she described them as real beauties. A man named Charles Walters, he described Judy because he directed a lot of her films. He said, quote, "Judy was the big moneymaker at the time, a big success, but she was the ugly duckling. I think it had a very damaging effect on her emotionally for a long time. I think it lasted forever, really. Her insecurity was exacerbated by the attitude of studio chief Mayer, who referred to her as his, quote, little hunchback." Like, I don't understand. She's so beautiful. So in an interview with Barbara Walters in 1967, she's talking about her mom a little bit when it came to her being her manager and being so young. And Garland says, quote, "She would sort of stand in the wings when I was a little girl, and if I didn't feel good, if I was sick to my stomach, she'd say, 'You get out and sing, or I'll wrap you around the bedpost and break you off short.' So I'd go out and sing." And according to a biographer, Gerald Clark, Ethel, her mom, was the first to provide pills. They were ones that would give them more energy and then others to sleep. So this started when she was not even 10 years old. And Garland used to say that her mother was the real Wicked Witch of the West. So now she's 13. I kind of went out of order here, but that is of importance. So while she was in the studio in her early years, they really dressed her in very plain garments, very frilly, very juvenile gowns and costumes to really show the girl next door image that they created for her. They even had her wear removable caps on her teeth and rubberized discs to reshape her nose. One of Garland's most successful films, one of my all-time favorite with MGM, is Meet Me in St. Louis. If you haven't seen it, you really should. It's literally where the song "Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas" comes from. And it was one of her first films that really gave her the opportunity to be an attractive leading lady. Vincent Minnelli, he was the director, and he requested that Judy be assigned to a makeup artist named Dorothy Ponadell, and she really helped Judy with her appearance because she helped reshape her eyebrows, she changed her hairline, helped modify her lip line, and she got rid of the nose discs and the dental caps, and it really did a lot for Judy. And that makeup artist was in her contract for her remaining time at MGM. She appeared in more than 24 films for MGM, and she worked a lot with Mickey Rooney and Gene Kelly, and also collaborated a lot with her second husband, Vincent Minnelli. She very sadly claims that Rooney and a lot of the other young performers were constantly prescribed amphetamines to help them stay awake and to keep up with the pace of making one film after another after another. She said they were given barbiturates to take going to bed so they could sleep. They were regularly using drugs, which led to addiction, which she contributes to her lifelong struggle. She resented the hectic schedule that they would put them through and believed that MGM had stolen her youth. Rooney actually denied that the studio was responsible for her addiction and that Judy was never given any drugs by MGM. Rooney says, quote, Judy Garland was never given any drugs by Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. Mr. Mayer didn't sanction anything for Judy. No one on that lot was responsible for Judy Garland's death. Unfortunately, Judy chose that path. So Judy Garland was this beautiful, young, small girl, and her weight was healthy. But the studio demanded that she needs to diet. They would give her like a bowl of soup and a plate of lettuce when she tried to order a different meal. And that just fueled her self-doubt through her entire life. She was extremely successful in her films and recordings, her career, her praise, her abilities. But she required constant reassurance that she was talented and she was attractive. She was never confident in the way that she looked, and a lot of that had to do because of the girl next door image that the studio created. Judy Garland is known for her part playing Dorothy Gale in Wizard of Oz. She's had so many different roles, so many amazing movies, but this is the big one, you know. She was 16 when they filmed, and this was in 1938. Wizard of Oz is based off a book, a 1900 children's book by L. Frank Baum, and she sang the most beautiful song over the rainbow, but she was not the first choice for Dorothy. The producers wanted Judy Garland for the role, but Mayer, the chief studio director, Mayer, the last M&M GM, he wanted Shirley Temple. But she was with 20th Century Fox and declined. And then he wanted Deanna Durbin when asked, but she was not available. So he gave in and said that Judy could be casted. They originally put a blonde wig on her, but the producers decided against it before they started filming. But her blue gingham dress was really chosen for a blurring effect on her figure, which made her look younger. There are reports that she was actually put on a massive diet consisting of cigarettes, chicken soup, and coffee. And this was clarified in a book called The Road to Oz, The Evolution, Creation, and Legacy of a Motion Picture Masterpiece by Jay Scarfone and William Stillman. I took a film class in college, loved it, did a huge report on The Wizard of Oz, and I've read part of that book, so it's really good if you guys are interested in knowing more about it. I could probably do a whole nother episode on just The Wizard of Oz. But these rumors of her only being given cigarettes, chicken soup, coffee were not correct. She was very anti-smoker, she did not smoke, and she was allowed to eat solid food. But there's a lot of reports out there about their limited diet that they put her on. But they also really attempted to minimize her curves. So along with a diet they put her on, they had her doing a lot of activities like swimming, hiking. They had her play tennis and badminton, and on set too, like she would play with her stunt double. So later on in her career, she was able to play her first adult role. It was a dual role of being both a mother and a daughter, and a lot was put on her appeal and her physical appearance. So it was extremely challenging for her. The whole role was she had to use an accent. It was her first adult kiss and the only death scene that she will have in her entire career. Her co-star at the time, named George Murphy, he thought the kiss was extremely embarrassing. He said, quote, "It felt like a hillbilly with a child bride." Yeah, gross. Through all that, she's young. She's still very young. And her first serious adult relationship started with a band leader, Artie Shaw. But Artie came to marry somebody else. And so Judy began another relationship with a musician, David Rose. So again, she gets married a lot. She is her life's just so sad. But yes, she, on her 18th birthday, David Rose gave her an engagement ring. The studio was not happy because David Rose was still married to actress and singer Martha Raye. And so they had to wait a year for the divorce to become finalized. And during that time, waiting for David Rose, she had an affair with the songwriter Johnny Mercer. And then she breaks up with Mercer, and Garland and Rose were married July 27th, 1941. And the media blew it up, and the media called it a rarity, interestingly enough. And then in January 1943, they agreed to a trial separation and were divorced in 1944. So that didn't last very long. In 1941, so while they were married, Judy was pregnant with Rose's child. She actually had an abortion at the insistence of her mother and the studio because the pregnancy wasn't approved. Ugh. She actually had a second abortion in 1943 when she became pregnant from her affair with Tyrone Power. When she was filming Meet Me in St. Louis, Garland and the director at the time, Minnelli, they struggled at first, but they actually got into a relationship and got married. June 15th, 1945. She gets married quick. It's really one after another. And then almost a year later, in 1946, Liza Minnelli was born, her daughter, and by 1951 they divorced. In April of 1948, she was filming a movie called The Pirate, and Judy suffered a major nervous breakdown. She was actually placed in a private sanatorium. She continued to film while she was in there, but in July, while she was in the sanatorium, she actually made her first suicide attempt. She'd only been there a couple months. She had done minor cuts on her wrist with some broken glass. So then during this period, she spent 2 weeks in treatment at the Austin Riggs Center, which is a psychiatric hospital in Stockbridge, Massachusetts. Still working with MGM, she was partnered up with Fred Astaire in the movie The Barclays of Broadway, and this was after she had gotten out of treatment. And it was said that Garland was taking prescription barbiturate sleeping pills along with illicitly obtained pills containing morphine, some heavy stuff. And around this time also she had a problem with alcohol. They would cause her to have massive migraine headaches, and she would miss several days of shooting. So her doctor had said that she would only be able to work in 4 to 5 day increments with extended rest in between. And MGM was not for that. They made the decision to suspend her from the film in 1948, and she was replaced by Ginger Rogers. So during her suspension, she did well. She gained strength and she put on weight that she very much needed to put back on. And she returned to MGM in 1948 to film Good Old Summertime. But she was again late arriving to the studio, but she really put herself to work and managed to complete it 5 days ahead of schedule. So she was still struggling, but she made it work. So she was cast in the film adaptation of Annie Get Your Gun. She was the major role of Annie Oakley. She had been playing, young juvenile parts for so long, and she was not liking the treatment that she was getting from the director, Busby Berkeley. And he was a part of staging all the musical numbers and everything like that, but he had a very bad problem with Garland because he said she had lack of effort, attitude, and enthusiasm. So Judy complained and tried to get him fired from the feature because, again, she was arriving late to the set and sometimes wouldn't come at all. And sadly, she was actually receiving electroconvulsive therapy for her depression during that time in 1949, and that was her nervous breakdown. And she went back to a hospital stay at Peter Bent Brigham Hospital in Boston, Massachusetts, where they were able to wean her off of her medication and get her back to feeling normal. So she came back to LA, 1949, and was cast opposite Gene Kelly in the movie Summer Stock. It took 6 months to complete, and again, Garland had to lose weight, so she was back on the pills, and her patterns just came right back. And she was showing up late or not showing up at all. And she had lost about 15 pounds by the end of filming. She was then cast in a film called The Royal Wedding with Fred Astaire, and again, she failed to report onto set, and the studio suspended her contract June 17th of 1950. So after 15 years with MGM, the studio released her completely because of her personal struggles that kept her from fulfilling the terms of her contracts during filming. Biographers have said that the last dismissal, she attempted suicide again. She had grazed her neck with broken glass, and it says slightly grazed, so it's hard to, it only required a Band-Aid. It's very hard to get into the head about what's happening at that time. But of course, the media and the public took it completely differently and kept saying that she had slashed her throat. And Garland had spoken. She said, quote, "All I could see ahead was more confusion. I wanted to black out the future as well as the past. I wanted to hurt myself and everyone who had hurt me." But she goes on to keep working. She never gives up. She was always at the Kraft Music Hall, which was hosted by her friend Bing Crosby. So after her suicide attempt, Crosby knew that she was depressed, she was running out of money, and he actually invited her onto his radio show in October of 1950. And doing that really got her career back on track, and she did a tour through Europe playing sold-out concerts. In 1951, she did a tour in Britain and Ireland, just completely sold out, especially through England, Scotland, and Ireland. She says, quote, "I knew that this was the beginning of a new life. Hollywood thought I was through. Then came the wonderful opportunity to appear at the London Palladium, where I can truly say Judy Garland was reborn." Like I said earlier, Judy and Minnelli were divorced and in 1951, and so June of 1952, she married Sidney Luft. He was her tour manager and producer. And November of 1952, she gave birth to her daughter, Lorna Luft, who became an actress and a singer. And then in 1955, she gave birth to her son, Joey Luft. Her film career wasn't as large later in life, but she did have some very critically acclaimed roles in her later career. She received a nomination for the Academy Award for Best Actress in her performance in A Star is Born, and a nomination for Best Supporting Actress in her performance in Judgment at Nuremberg. But even shooting these films, it all started again. She began making the same remarks about illness and that she did during her time at MGM. And again, production delays started to come into play, cost overruns, and a lot of very angry confrontations. 1956, Judy performed at the New Frontier Hotel in Las Vegas. But sadly, jumping ahead to 1959, Garland was actually hospitalized. She was diagnosed with acute hepatitis. She had several quarts of fluid drained from her body until she was released in January of 1960. So she was there for months. Still extremely weak. Doctors had told her that she probably had 5 years or less to live, and even if she did survive, they said she would be a semi-invalid and would never sing again. She actually said that hearing about that was a great relief. She said, quote, "The pressure was off me for the first time in my life." But she ended up recovering over the next several months, and she returned to the stage at the Palladium in England, and she just loved it there. She loved how the people there just embraced everything about her, and she announced that she intended to move to England permanently. 1960, Garland actually signed a contract with Random House to write her autobiography. And she worked with a man, Fred F. Finkelhoff, and they would record conversations about her life to produce in the manuscript. And they worked on it on and off through the 1960s, but it was never complete because of her death. Later in her career, keep going, she had record-breaking concert appearances. She released 8 solo albums and hosted her own Emmy-nominated television series, The Judy Garland Show. Judy Garland had a 6-month affair with actor Glenn Ford, and it's been told in different biographies of both Judy and Glenn's side of their families, and it said that it began in 1963 when Judy was doing her television show, and Ford would come to attend the tapings of the show sitting right in front while Garland sang. Fred was a good thing because he is credited with giving Judy one of the more stable relationships of her later life. Sadly, it did end. Ford was a notorious womanizer, and he realized that Judy wanted to marry him, and so he ended that relationship. It's like he was good for her, but not a great guy. Doesn't make sense. 1963, Judy sued her ex-husband, Sidney Luft, for divorce on the ground of mental cruelty. She said that he had struck her repeatedly while he was drinking and had attempted to take their children from her by force. She filed for divorce with him many, many times, as early as 1956, but they actually reconciled each time, but this was the final one. She was performing in Melbourne, Australia, and the struggles just keep coming back. She had been performing in Australia the days before, doing well, starting to struggle, but her third performance there, it started an hour late. There was a crowd of 7,000 people extremely angry because of her tardiness. They believed that she was drunk, and they actually started booing and heckling her, and she fled the stage after 45 minutes. And the Melbourne media called her brutish, and that really hit hard with gaining a lot of negative press response from that. Judy and her tour promoter, Mark Heron, announced that they had gotten married aboard a freighter off the coast of Hong Kong, but she was not divorced from Luft yet when the ceremony was performed. So finally, May of 1965, their divorce was finalized, and she and Mark got legally married later in 1965 and separated 5 months later. Garland said that Mark had beaten her, and then Mark claimed that he had only hit her in self-defense. Very interesting. So throughout her career, especially in 1950s and 60s, she and her ex-husband, Sidney Luft, had been her manager. But eventually she parted ways with Luft and signed with Freddie Fields and David Begelman. 1966, she actually parted ways with them also. But it was a realization because Fields and Begelman mismanaged her money. They had embezzled a lot of her earnings. She ended up owing $500,000 in personal debts to the IRS. They placed tax liens on her home in Brentwood and her recording contract with Capitol Records and any other deals that she got that brought in income. So literally, the IRS has control over all of her money. She made money, it went straight to the IRS. A woman named Jacqueline Susan, she was a part of the movie Valley of the Dolls, which Judy was originally on but was taken off. She said about Judy, quote, "I think Judy will always come back. She kids about making a lot of comebacks, but I think Judy is the kind of thing where she has to get to the bottom of the rope and things have to get very, very rough for her. Then with an amazing inner strength that only comes from a certain genius, she comes back bigger than ever." She returned to the stage in her last U.S. appearance in New York Palace Theater in July 1967. And she had earned, at that time, $200,000 from that engagement. And on the closing night there, federal tax agents seized the majority of her earnings. So she literally made zero money. By 1969, Judy's health had majorly deteriorated. She was performing in London at the Talk of the Town nightclub and had another appearance in Copenhagen during March of 1969. She ended up divorcing from Mark Heron in February of 1969, and she married her fifth and final husband, nightclub manager Mickey Deans, at the Chelsea Register Office in London on March 15th of 1969. At age 39, Judy became the youngest and first female recipient of the Cecil B. DeMille Award for Lifetime Achievement in the film industry. In 1997, Judy was awarded the Grammy Life Achievement Award, and several of her recordings have been inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame, and in 1999, the American Film Institute ranked her as the 8th greatest female screen legend of classic Hollywood cinema. Judy still continued to struggle in her personal life, like she had from an early age, and the pressures of stardom really affected her physically and mentally, ever since she was a teenager. Again, extremely influenced by the constant criticism she was getting from film executives, and they really believed that she was physically unattractive, and they would manipulate her on-screen physical appearance. It's crazy. So through most of her adulthood, she abused different drugs and alcohol, and she had some major financial troubles, and she had to owe thousands and thousands, again, like I said in the beginning, to IRS because of a lot of back taxes. And her substance abuse ultimately led to her death from an accidental overdose in 1969. She was 47. So June 22nd, 1969, she was found dead in the bathroom of her rented house in Cadogan Lane, Belgravia, London. Coroner Gavin Thurston stated that the cause of death was, quote, an incautious self-overdose of barbiturates. Her blood contained the equivalent of 1.5 grain or 97 milligrams sentinel capsules. I'm sorry, I'm butchering it. Thurston also said that the overdose had been unintentional and no evidence suggested that she intended to kill herself. Her autopsy showed no inflammation of her stomach lining and no drug residue in her stomach, so that indicated that the drug had been ingested over a long period of time rather than a single dose. So her death certificate stated that her death was accidental. And Judy's physician noted that prescription of 25 barbiturate pills were found by her bedside, half empty, and another bottle of 100 were still unopened, so she had a lot. A British specialist, he actually attended Judy's autopsy, said that she had nevertheless been living on borrowed time owing to her cirrhosis, although a second autopsy conducted later reported no evidence of alcoholism or cirrhosis. And remember, she also has hepatitis. Her Wizard of Oz co-star Ray Bolger commented at her funeral, he said, quote, "She just plain wore out." Forensic pathologist Jason Payne James believes that Judy had an eating disorder, possibly bulimia nervosa, which also contributed to her death. After she was embalmed, there were an estimated 20,000 people lined up to pay their respects at the Frank E. Chapel funeral in Manhattan, and it actually remained open all night long to accommodate the crowd. During her eulogy, they said, quote, "Judy's great gift was that she could wring tears out of hearts of rocks. She gave so richly and so generously that there was no currency in which to repay her." The public and the press were actually barred from her funeral. They were not allowed. And then she was interred in a crypt in the community mausoleum at Furton Cliff Cemetery in Hartsdale, New York, which is about 24 miles north of Manhattan. Sadly, upon her death also, she had made millions throughout her career, but her estate only came to about $40,000, which would be kind of like $250,000 now, because of the years of mismanagement of her finances and her, staff around her. And she was extremely generous towards her family and to various causes, and that really put her in a poor financial situation at the end of her life. In her last will, she had put in some generous offerings that could not be fulfilled because her estate was in so much debt. Her daughter, Liza Minnelli, worked to pay off her mother's debts with the help of the family friend Frank Sinatra. And in 1978, they actually took her personal items and auctioned them off by her ex-husband, Sidney Luft, with her daughter, Lorna Luft, and their son, Joey. They sold almost 500 items, ranging from cookware to musical arrangements, and the auction raised about $900,000 for her heirs. And at the request of her children, they moved Judy's remains from Ferncliff Cemetery in 2017 and reinterred it across the country at the Hollywood Forever Cemetery in LA. People, a lot of their fans and audiences, really think of Judy as Dorothy. They're preserving her memory as Dorothy, no matter how much she matured and everything that she was in. They say, quote, "A captive not of her own desire to stay young, but a captive of the public's desire to preserve her that way." And I totally agree. I don't remember watching things with Judy Garland where she was older. My biggest memories are of Wizard of Oz and Meet Me in St. Louis. So it's kind of crazy to think about that. We are really preserving her youth, But there was a lot of information that I found about audience members and different members of the entertainment industry that really didn't like Judy. I didn't want to put it all in here because it was a lot and it was very sad to read. And so I kind of summarized it by, they would say they either tended to either love her or hate her. Her younger daughter, Lorna, agreed that she was being hated on because she was such a tragic figure. She goes on to explain, quote, "We all have tragedies in our lives, but that does not make us tragic. She was funny and she was warm and she was wonderfully gifted. She had great highs and great moments in her career. She also had great moments in her personal life. Yes, we lost her at 47 years old. That was tragic, but she was not a tragic figure. But there are people that argue that Judy had actually used the public's opinion of her being so tragic and the image of that to advance her career, which is sad. So this last part is from an article that I have referenced in the show notes. I wanted to read this last part word for word. So, quote, Judy Garland's legacy will live forever on, and it has continued to inspire decades after her death. It was confirmed that there are 3 movies about her life that are in the works, and every song she has recorded has been reissued. When she passed, Liza was 23 and Lorna was 16. Liza had admitted in an interview, quote, "You can't ever get in the way of talent like my mom's. No matter what people said or what people did or what drama was created or what was going on, the talent will come through again and again and again," end quote. So that is Judy Garland, guys. I know there's I could have gone into massive detail on so many, every movie, what happened, because I just found so much information. But I've been kind of shortening the episodes lately, so I wanted to make sure on this one too. But I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you want to follow me, I'm on Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. And on TikTok, it's a sneak preview of the episode, and then I do have full episodes on YouTube if you like to listen to it that way. Join me next Tuesday, the 23rd, is our bonus zodiac sign. We're doing Gemini. And then that Wednesday, the 24th, we are going to be heading to New Hampshire to talk about some UFOs. I'm pretty excited about this one. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed it. Please go on and rate and review wherever you get your podcasts. I would greatly appreciate that. And please pass the word around. Yeah. So thank you guys again for all of your support and listens. And we'll see you next Tuesday. Bye.